Karen electrocutes a royal guard with a stun gun and learned a shocking lesson she'll never forget. From a young age, she had a sense of adventure that sometimes made her impulsive. She liked to test boundaries, not because she wanted to cause trouble, but because she wanted to understand the world in a very direct way. For Karen, every trip was a chance to learn something new, meet interesting people, and sometimes push herself just a little outside her comfort zone. This time, her travels had taken her to one of the most famous royal palaces in Europe. It was a massive structure, older than she could imagine, with tall stone walls, intricately designed gates, and gardens that seemed to stretch forever. Tourists from all over the world had come to see it, but Karen had a particular fascination, not just with the palace itself, but with the guards. The guards, dressed in their pristine uniforms with stiff hats and polished shoes, were stationed at attention in front of the gates. They never moved a muscle, never smiled, and never spoke unless spoken to. Their discipline was legendary, and stories of how they stood perfectly still for hours on end had always intrigued Karen. From the moment she arrived at the palace, Karen was observing everything. She noticed how people quietly took photos, always careful not to disturb the guards. She watched families whisper to their children, pointing at the men and women in uniform, teaching them to respect the rules. She noticed the cameras clicking everywhere, the murmurs of tourists, and the faint sound of the wind passing over the stone walls. Every detail fascinated her. She loved the energy, the history, and the sense of order that seemed almost magical. As she walked closer to the gates, Karen's friends stayed a few steps behind, chatting about the flowers in the garden and the intricate designs on the palace walls. Karen, however, was focused entirely on the guards. There was a certain rigidity to them that she couldn't understand. How could someone stand still for so long, without shifting, without blinking more than necessary, without showing any emotion at all? It seemed impossible, and that thought sparked a mix of admiration and mischief inside her. Karen had brought along a small stun gun. She had bought it months ago for self-defense while traveling. It was lightweight, easy to carry, and she had practiced using it at home on some old metal objects. She had never used it on a person, and honestly, she had never planned to. It was meant to make her feel safe. But standing in front of the palace gates, watching the guards stand motionless, an impulsive idea crept into her mind. What would it be like, she wondered, to see what happens if she tried it on one of the guards? Just a small shock, just a tiny zap, and nothing serious. After all, it was only a stun gun. She shook her head quickly, trying to push the thought away. She had always been careful, and she had never gotten into serious trouble before. But at the same time, a small, mischievous part of her whispered that maybe it would be exciting to see the reaction. Maybe it would just be a funny story to tell later. She could see the headlines in her mind. Tourist shocks guard at famous palace. It sounded silly, but her heart raced with curiosity. Before she could make a decision, Karen's tour guide walked up to her. He was a tall man with a friendly face, carrying a small notebook in his hand. "Remember," he said, pointing to the guards, "they are not toys. Do not touch them or try to distract them. They are trained to stay still, and they take their jobs very seriously. Even a small disturbance can cause a serious problem." Karen nodded quickly, forcing a smile. "Of course, I understand," she said, but inside she couldn't help thinking about how interesting it would be to see what happens. She told herself it was just curiosity, nothing more. She reminded herself that she had never broken rules like this before, that she was careful, and that this was just a thought, not an action. She walked closer to the nearest guard. He was tall, with a sharp uniform that looked like it had been ironed perfectly. His posture was perfect, his face serious, and his eyes stared straight ahead. Karen could feel the tension in the air. People were taking pictures from a safe distance, whispering to each other and moving slowly so as not to disturb the scene. Karen felt a strange mixture of respect and challenge. She watched him for a long time. She noticed the tiny movements he made to stay balanced, the way his hands were perfectly still, and how his breathing was calm but controlled. It was almost hypnotic, and Karen couldn't look away. For a moment she imagined herself standing there like him, completely still with the whole world watching. The idea both terrified and fascinated her. Karen's friends had moved on to look at the gardens, leaving her alone near the gate. She looked around, making sure no one was watching too closely. Her fingers brushed against the stun gun in her bag. It was small, simple, and easy to conceal. She told herself that it would be harmless, just a tiny zap, and then she could put it away. The thought made her nervous, but the curiosity was stronger. Her mind was racing. She thought about the stories she had read about tourists causing trouble, about people who had acted impulsively and then regretted it. She remembered her tour guide's warning and the serious expressions on the other tourists' faces. And yet, a part of her wondered if maybe it could be controlled, maybe she could just do it for a moment and learn something from the experience. As she stood there, her heart pounding, Karen realized she was facing a choice. She could walk away and admire the guards from a distance like everyone else. Or she could give in to the impulsive idea that had been forming in her mind. The idea was dangerous, she knew that, but it was also thrilling. She had never felt anything like this before. Her curiosity was pulling her toward something risky, and for some reason it was almost irresistible. Karen's hand closed around the stun gun. She could feel its weight and its smooth surface. It was real, and it was ready. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her nerves. Her mind was full of questions. What would happen if she pressed the button? Would it make a loud noise? Would the guard move? Would people notice? She imagined the guard jerking slightly, just a small shock and nothing more. For a moment, she convinced herself that it would be okay. She could control it. She had done research about how stun guns worked. They were meant to incapacitate for a short time, not cause permanent harm. She told herself that she was careful, that she was strong, and that she could handle the situation. It was just curiosity, nothing more. Karen's gaze returned to the guard. He was still standing perfectly, his eyes staring straight ahead, his expression unreadable. She felt a strange mix of admiration and challenge. It was as if he was daring her to test her limits, and that thought made her heart race even faster. She knew she shouldn't, but the temptation was strong. She told herself one last time to be careful. She reminded herself that this was only a small zap, just enough to satisfy her curiosity. She took another deep breath, feeling the adrenaline rush through her body. Her fingers tightened around the stun gun. She was about to make a choice that could change everything in a matter of seconds. At that moment, Karen didn't yet know the consequences of her decision. She didn't know how quickly things could spiral out of control. All she knew was that she was curious, impulsive, and ready to test the limits of her own daring nature. The palace, the guard, and the thousands of tourists around her were about to witness a moment that she would never forget, even if she survived it. Her curiosity, combined with her impulsive courage, had led her to the very edge of an experience she had never imagined. She was about to learn, in the most shocking way possible, that some boundaries were not meant to be tested, and that even a small decision could have consequences far larger than she could predict. Karen's heart was racing faster than ever as she stood close to the guard. The small stun gun was heavy in her hand, yet somehow comforting, a tool that made her feel like she had control over a situation that was already making her pulse jump. The guard remained motionless, eyes fixed straight ahead, his posture perfect as if he were carved from stone. Tourists around her were quietly taking photos, whispering to one another and moving carefully so as not to disturb the scene. Karen could feel the weight of their gaze, even if most of them weren't looking directly at her. For a moment, Karen considered stepping back, letting her curiosity fade and enjoying the palace grounds from a safe distance. But something inside her urged her forward. It was a mix of boldness, thrill, and the small, mischievous voice she had tried to ignore earlier. She told herself it would be harmless, just a tiny zap, nothing serious. She could stop immediately if anything went wrong. Her hand shook slightly as she lifted the stun gun, aiming carefully. She could feel the tingling energy in her fingers, a strange mix of fear and excitement. Karen reminded herself that she was not hurting anyone permanently. She had researched the device and understood that it was meant to stun, not harm. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself, feeling the adrenaline rush through her body. And then she pressed the button. A sudden crackling sound erupted from the stun gun. Karen barely had time to register the noise before the guard jerked violently. His body twitched, a sharp reaction that was immediate and undeniable. Gasps and cries came from the tourists nearby, some stepping back in shock. Karen's heart skipped a beat. She had expected a small movement, maybe a slight reaction, but this was far more dramatic than she had imagined. The guard let out a sharp shout, startling everyone in the area. Karen froze in place, panic overtaking her curiosity. Her eyes widened as she realized how serious this had become. The once motionless figure was now reacting strongly to her impulsive action, and the reality of the situation hit her like a cold wave. People were pointing, whispering, and staring. She could feel all eyes on her, judging her, and she wished desperately that she could disappear. Security personnel appeared almost instantly. Karen had underestimated how fast the response would be. Two officers ran toward her and the guard, moving quickly but carefully. Their expressions were serious, not angry but firm, and Karen could feel the weight of authority pressing down on her. She tried to speak, to explain herself, but no words came out. Her mouth opened and closed as she struggled to form a sentence, but it was too late. The stun gun fell from her hand as one officer reached her, lifting her arm gently but firmly and guiding her away from the guard. Karen's mind was spinning. She was terrified and embarrassed, not just because she had caused a scene, but because she now understood how dangerous her impulsive action could have been. She realized that she had put herself, the guard, and the surrounding tourists at risk. The adrenaline that had made her feel brave a few moments ago now made her feel foolish and panicked. The guard, though regaining composure, was clearly shaken. Karen noticed how he steadied himself against the gate, his hands gripping the metal railing. He took deep breaths, his eyes focused but wary. Karen could see the tension in his shoulders and the way his legs trembled slightly. She felt a pang of guilt and fear. She had never intended to hurt anyone, but she now recognized that her curiosity and recklessness had consequences far beyond what she had imagined. The officers escorted Karen to a small area near the palace entrance. She could hear murmurs and whispers behind her, the low hum of conversations filled with curiosity, shock, and judgment. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. She wanted to disappear, to vanish into thin air, but she knew she couldn't. There was no way to undo what had happened. Karen's thoughts raced. She imagined what could have happened if the guard had been seriously injured. She thought about the news stories she had read about tourists causing trouble in public places, and she realized she could have ended up in serious trouble, not just embarrassment. Her pulse was still racing, her hands trembling, and her mind was filled with regret. The officers spoke to her calmly but firmly. They asked her to explain what had happened. Karen stammered, her voice shaking, explaining that it was a moment of curiosity, that she had not intended to harm anyone, and that she had only meant to see the guard's reaction. The officers listened, taking notes and asking questions. Karen realized that every word she said was important, that her explanation could affect how seriously the situation was taken. Meanwhile, the tourists around the palace were still watching from a distance. Karen could feel their eyes, and she felt a growing sense of shame. She had wanted to be bold, to satisfy her curiosity, but she now wished she had listened to her tour guide, who had warned her about disturbing the guards. She understood that the rules were there for a reason, and that even a small act of impulsiveness could create a chain of events with serious consequences. The guard, now fully regaining composure, approached the officers. Karen could see the seriousness in his eyes. He was polite but firm, and Karen realized that he had every right to be upset. She felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had treated the situation lightly, thinking it would be a funny story, but now she understood that it was not a joke. The guard's professionalism and calm demeanor made her reflect on her own impulsive behavior. Karen tried to apologize, her voice barely above a whisper. She felt small, realizing how reckless she had been. The guard nodded slightly, accepting her apology, but Karen knew that the incident had already left a mark. She had learned in a very real way that actions have consequences, and that curiosity and mischief, when combined with carelessness, can lead to serious situations. As she was escorted further away from the palace gates, Karen noticed the reactions of the other tourists. Some were shocked, some amused, and some sympathetic. She realized that her impulsive action had not only affected the guard and herself, but had also disrupted the experience of others who had come to enjoy the palace peacefully. The weight of responsibility hit her fully, and she felt a deep sense of remorse. Karen's thoughts turned inward. She reflected on how easy it had been to let her curiosity lead her astray. She thought about the decisions she had made, the warnings she had ignored, and the risks she had taken. For the first time, she truly understood the difference between harmless curiosity and reckless behavior. She realized that bravery and impulsiveness were not always the same thing, and that respecting rules, boundaries, and other people's space was part of being responsible and mature. The officers led Karen to a quiet room where she could sit and calm down. They offered her water and allowed her a moment to collect her thoughts. Karen felt her body relax slightly, but her mind was still racing. She thought about how quickly the situation had escalated, how fast her fun and curiosity had turned into panic and fear. She understood that she had narrowly avoided serious consequences, and the realization left her feeling shaken. Karen sat quietly, replaying the moments in her mind. She could still see the guards' sharp reaction, the gasps of the tourists, and the swift arrival of the officers. She understood that in a matter of seconds, her impulsive action had disrupted the calm and order of the palace. She realized that her curiosity, while natural, had been unchecked, and that learning to control impulses was an essential part of growing up and traveling responsibly. As the situation settled, Karen reflected on the lesson she had learned. She realized that thrill and excitement could be tempting, but they should never come at the expense of safety, respect, or responsibility. She understood that the guards' discipline, the palace's rules, and the reactions of those around her were all reminders that the world operates on rules that are often invisible until they are broken. Karen's embarrassment slowly transformed into understanding. She knew that she would never forget this moment, that it would stay with her as a powerful reminder of the importance of thoughtfulness, respect, and self-control. She also knew that sharing this experience with friends, family, and fellow travelers could help others avoid the same mistakes. By the time the officers had finished their questioning, Karen felt a mixture of relief and humility. She realized that she had survived a potentially dangerous situation and that she had the opportunity to learn from it. The adrenaline that had once made her feel brave had now been replaced by a sober understanding of consequences. She knew that curiosity, while valuable, must be balanced with respect and caution. Karen left the palace grounds that day with a new perspective. She walked slowly, taking in the beauty of the gardens, the grandeur of the palace, and the orderly presence of the guards. She admired the discipline, professionalism, and calm demeanor of the people she had encountered, realizing that they were the guardians not just of a palace, but of safety, order, and respect. And though her heart still raced at the memory of the stun gun incident, Karen knew she had learned an important lesson, one that would stay with her forever. She had experienced firsthand how quickly fun and curiosity could turn into fear and responsibility, and she understood that real adventure was about learning, respecting boundaries, and growing from every experience. Karen's impulsive moment at the palace became a story she would carry with her, a story about curiosity, consequence, and the sudden shock of reality. She had faced a situation that could have gone very wrong, and she had survived it, learning more about herself and the world around her than she could have imagined. From that day forward, Karen approached her adventures with a deeper sense of respect and awareness, knowing that even the smallest actions can have the biggest impact. Karen could hardly believe what had happened just hours earlier. The adrenaline from the stun gun incident was fading, leaving her with a heavy sense of reality. Her hands still trembled slightly as she recalled the sharp jerk of the guard, the gasps of the surrounding tourists, and the swift approach of the palace security officers. What had seemed like a harmless experiment in curiosity had transformed into a moment of chaos and fear, and now Karen faced the full weight of her impulsive decision. Sitting quietly in her hotel room, Karen reflected on everything that had unfolded. She had replayed the event in her mind countless times, and with each replay, she understood more clearly just how reckless she had been. The guards' reaction, the officers' swift response, and the concerned whispers of tourists had all combined into a single, unforgettable lesson. Karen realized that the thrill she had sought was nothing compared to the potential danger she had created. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ping of her phone. It was a message from her friend Anna, who had been with her at the palace. "Are you okay?" Anna wrote. Karen felt a wave of relief and anxiety at the same time. Relief because she was safe, and anxiety because she knew she had to explain exactly what had happened. She typed back a short response, "I'm okay, but I've learned my lesson the hard way." She didn't want to relive the embarrassment through text, but she wanted Anna to understand the seriousness of the situation. Karen's mind drifted back to the guard. He had been professional, but she could see the tension in his movements even after the shock. He was calm on the outside, but she imagined the thoughts running through his head. Every guard at the palace likely faced distractions and minor incidents, but Karen's action had crossed a line. She felt deep guilt. The realization that she had caused someone else fear and discomfort weighed heavily on her. She had never intended to hurt anyone, yet her impulsive choice had done exactly that. As Karen sat with her thoughts, she began to think about how quickly events could spiral out of control. In the moment, she had only seen a small zap, a tiny shock, and a quick reaction. But reality had shown her that even small actions could have far-reaching consequences. The adrenaline rush, the thrill of testing boundaries, and the initial amusement had all vanished, replaced by fear, guilt, and a sobering awareness of responsibility. Karen remembered the officers' words vividly. They had spoken calmly but firmly, emphasizing the seriousness of the situation. "You must understand," one of them had said, "even a small action can create big problems. Rules are not there to restrict curiosity. They are there to protect everyone, including you." Those words resonated deeply with Karen. She had thought she was in control, that she could manage the consequences, but she now realized that control was an illusion when impulsiveness guided her actions. The incident had also affected her perspective on curiosity itself. Karen had always valued curiosity, believing it to be a driving force for learning and adventure. But she now understood that curiosity without caution could be dangerous. It was a lesson in balance. The excitement of discovery must be tempered by respect, awareness, and responsibility. Karen reflected on how many times she had acted impulsively in smaller ways, thinking she could handle the outcome, and she realized how lucky she had been that the consequences had not been worse. Her thoughts turned to the reactions of the other tourists. She remembered their expressions, shock, disbelief, and a few smiles that masked the tension of the moment. She realized that her impulsive action had disrupted not only her experience, but theirs as well. People had come to the palace to enjoy the history, beauty, and tradition, and her moment of recklessness had drawn attention and created discomfort. Karen felt a deep responsibility for her impact on others, recognizing that even minor actions could affect a larger group of people in unexpected ways. As she replayed the event in her mind, Karen could almost feel the vibrations of the stun gun, the sharp sound, and the immediate reaction of the guard. She shivered at the memory, knowing that the fear she had seen in his eyes had been real. This was not a storybook moment or a harmless prank. It was a real-life incident with real consequences. Karen's impulsiveness had momentarily disrupted order, safety, and trust, and she could not ignore the seriousness of that realization. Karen's thoughts then turned inward. She considered her own behavior and motivations. Why had she acted so impulsively? Was it the thrill of testing limits, the desire for attention, or simply curiosity gone unchecked? She realized it was a combination of all three. In that moment, Karen had sought excitement without fully considering the potential outcomes. She understood now that impulsive actions could quickly move from harmless fun to dangerous reality. The weight of guilt pressed on Karen as she thought about the possible outcomes. She imagined scenarios where the guard could have been injured, where security could have escalated the situation, or where legal consequences might have arisen. The fear of what could have happened made her heart race again. She knew that in another place or under slightly different circumstances, the outcome could have been far more serious. Karen understood that she had narrowly avoided a far worse situation, and the realization humbled her deeply. Karen also reflected on the importance of self-control. She realized that true courage was not in testing boundaries recklessly, but in understanding limits and respecting rules. The guard had been disciplined, professional, and calm in the face of her impulsiveness, and that had made a strong impression on her. She admired his dedication and realized that such discipline was something she could aspire to, not mock or challenge. It was a lesson in respect for others, roles, and responsibilities, something she had overlooked in her moment of thrill-seeking. As the day went on, Karen noticed that she was still replaying the event in her mind, analyzing every choice, every action, and every consequence. She thought about the adrenaline rush she had felt, the fear she had experienced, and the embarrassment of being the center of attention in an unintended way. The experience had left a permanent mark, a vivid memory that would serve as a guide for her behavior in the future. Karen also thought about how she could use this experience to grow. She considered sharing her story with friends and family, not as a tale of mischief, but as a lesson in responsibility, caution, and respect. She realized that her impulsive actions could serve as a warning to others, highlighting how curiosity and thrill must always be balanced with awareness and self-control. The incident had been frightening, yes, but it had also provided a rare opportunity for reflection and growth. She remembered the look on the guard's face as he recovered from the shock. There was no anger, just calmness and professionalism. That had struck Karen profoundly. She realized that professionalism and discipline were qualities worth admiring, not challenging. The guard's ability to maintain composure in a sudden, unexpected situation had shown her a standard of behavior she could strive to emulate in her own life. Karen also thought about the officer's guidance and advice. They had not yelled or punished her harshly, but they had made it clear that the consequences of her actions could have been serious. She appreciated their calm approach, which had allowed her to reflect and understand her mistake without adding fear to her guilt. Their professionalism reinforced the lesson she was learning. Rules exist for a reason, and respect for authority and others' space is essential. By evening, Karen began to feel a sense of resolution. The panic, fear, and guilt were still present, but they were transforming into understanding and insight. She knew she had made a serious mistake, but she also knew she could learn from it. She had been given a rare opportunity to experience firsthand the impact of impulsive actions, and she intended to carry that lesson with her for the rest of her life. Karen realized that this incident, as frightening and embarrassing as it had been, was also a turning point. It marked the moment when she truly understood the difference between harmless curiosity and reckless behavior. She had learned that every action has consequences, and that even small impulses could create ripples far beyond her immediate control. As she prepared for bed that night, Karen reflected on everything she had experienced. The thrill she had sought, the fear she had faced, the embarrassment she had endured, and the lessons she had learned. All of it combined into a powerful story that would shape her future decisions. She resolved to approach her curiosity with greater thoughtfulness, to respect rules and boundaries, and to understand that real adventure comes not from reckless actions, but from mindful exploration. Karen's mind finally began to calm as she drifted towards sleep. She knew that the memory of the palace, the guard, and the stun gun incident would remain with her forever. It was a lesson she had learned the hard way, but it was one that she would never forget. She understood that her impulsive moment had been a test, not just of her courage, but of her ability to recognize limits, take responsibility, and grow from experience. And in that moment of reflection, Karen felt a sense of quiet determination. She had faced fear, embarrassment, and the consequences of impulsiveness, and she had survived. More importantly, she had learned a lesson that would guide her in the future. Curiosity is powerful, but it must be balanced with respect, responsibility, and self-awareness. That realization, Karen knew, was worth far more than any fleeting thrill she had sought earlier in the day. Karen woke up the next morning with a mixture of apprehension and determination. The events at the palace were still fresh in her mind, and she could feel the lingering tension in her chest. She knew she had been lucky that the incident had not turned into something more serious, but the memory of the guard's sharp reaction and the rush of the officers had left a permanent mark on her consciousness. She felt a need to approach the day carefully, to act with thoughtfulness, and to ensure that she learned everything she could from the experience. After a quick breakfast, Karen decided to revisit the palace, not to repeat her reckless behavior, but to observe and understand. She walked slowly through the gardens, noticing details she had overlooked the day before. The flowers, the carefully trimmed hedges, and the ornate statues were all breathtaking, but she found herself focusing more on the guards this time. They stood at attention, eyes forward, completely disciplined, yet somehow serene. Karen felt admiration in a way she had not before. She realized that these individuals had devoted themselves to their roles, maintaining composure and professionalism under the constant gaze of the public. Karen thought about the lessons she had learned so far. Curiosity, she understood now, was a valuable trait, but it was not a license to act without caution. There was a difference between exploring and experimenting safely and acting impulsively without understanding the consequences. Her actions the day before had been impulsive, driven by a desire for thrill, but they had also shown her the importance of responsibility. She promised herself that she would carry this understanding forward, not just for the rest of her trip, but for her life. As she walked through the palace grounds, Karen reflected on the conversations she had with the officers. Their calm and measured responses had made a deep impression on her. They had not yelled, they had not shamed her, but they had explained the seriousness of her actions clearly and fairly. Karen realized that authority was not about punishment alone. It was about guidance, protection, and maintaining order. She thought about how much she had taken for granted before, assuming that rules existed only to limit freedom, and she felt a sense of humility. Karen found a quiet bench near a fountain and sat down to collect her thoughts. She thought about the guard again, imagining the discipline it took to remain so composed even after being startled. She realized that professionalism, patience, and self-control were qualities worth admiring. The guard's reaction had been a mirror to her own impulsiveness, showing her the contrast between thoughtless action and considered response. Karen felt a deep sense of respect and gratitude, understanding that she had disrupted someone's day and yet had been met with patience and dignity. As she sat, Karen began to think about the wider implications of her actions. Her impulsiveness had not only affected the guard and the officers, but had also drawn attention from the tourists and disrupted the atmosphere of the palace. She understood that even small actions can create ripples that extend far beyond what one initially imagines. This awareness was sobering, but it was also empowering. Karen realized that she had the ability to choose her actions carefully, to impact others positively, and to act responsibly even in moments of temptation or curiosity. Karen reflected on her own emotions during the incident, the rush of excitement, the fear, and the deep embarrassment that followed. She realized that these emotions were not inherently negative, but they were signals, guiding her to understand what was acceptable and what was not. Curiosity and thrill could coexist with caution, she understood, as long as she remained mindful of the consequences. This insight was a turning point for her, solidifying a new approach to adventure, exploration, and personal decision-making. Later in the day, Karen decided to speak with a small group of fellow tourists who had observed the incident. She wanted to share her reflections, not as a story of mischief, but as a lesson. She spoke about how quickly a seemingly harmless action could escalate, about the importance of respecting others, and about the value of self-control. The group listened attentively, and Karen felt a sense of connection. Sharing her experience helped her internalize the lesson further and also provided a cautionary tale for others. Karen's thoughts returned to the guard one last time. She wished she could apologize personally, not just for the shock she had caused, but for the momentary disruption of his day. She realized that respect for others is expressed through action as much as words. Even though she had made a mistake, she could still honor the guard's professionalism by carrying the lesson forward and acting responsibly in the future. That evening, Karen sat quietly in her hotel room, reviewing her day. She reflected on how her impulsive curiosity had led to a situation that could have been far more serious, and she felt gratitude for the calm and fair responses of those involved. She understood that life often provides unexpected lessons, and the key to growth is to recognize and learn from them. Karen's impulsive moment had been a shock, both literally and figuratively, but it had also been a powerful teacher. Karen thought about how she could apply this lesson beyond the palace. Curiosity, adventure, and exploration were essential to her spirit, but she now knew that they needed to be guided by awareness, respect, and caution. She resolved to approach every situation with thoughtful consideration, to ask herself whether her actions could harm others, and to act responsibly even in moments of excitement. This resolve gave her a sense of empowerment and maturity she had not felt before. As the trip continued, Karen noticed a shift in her perspective. She observed the world with a sharper eye, appreciating the beauty, history, and culture around her while also being mindful of her actions. She found joy in learning and exploring without taking unnecessary risks. Each step, each observation, and each interaction became a conscious choice, guided by the lessons she had learned at the palace. Karen's friends noticed the change as well. They remarked on how thoughtful and reflective she had become, and she realized that the experience had affected her profoundly. She no longer sought thrills without consideration, but instead found excitement in understanding, observing, and appreciating the world around her. The adrenaline-driven curiosity had been replaced by a calm, deliberate approach that allowed her to enjoy life fully without endangering herself or others. In the weeks that followed, Karen shared her story widely. She told her family, friends, and even casual acquaintances about the palace incident, not to boast, but to teach. She spoke about the importance of self-control, respect for others, and the consequences of impulsive actions. People were intrigued and impressed by her honesty and her willingness to learn from her mistakes. Karen realized that the incident, though embarrassing, had transformed into a meaningful life lesson that she could use to guide herself and others. By the end of her trip, Karen felt a sense of closure. She had faced fear, embarrassment, and the consequences of impulsiveness, and she had emerged with a deeper understanding of herself and the world. The palace, the guard, and the stun gun incident had all become part of a story she would carry with her forever, a story of curiosity, responsibility, and personal growth. Karen returned home with a renewed sense of purpose. She approached her daily life with more awareness, thoughtfulness, and respect. The lessons learned at the palace stayed with her, reminding her that even small actions can have significant consequences, and that curiosity, while valuable, must always be balanced with caution and respect. She also carried with her the memory of the guard's professionalism and composure, understanding that true strength is often shown not in dramatic action, but in calm, measured response. Karen admired his dedication and vowed to emulate that patience and self-control in her own life. Over time, Karen noticed subtle changes in her behavior. She made more thoughtful decisions, considered the impact of her actions on others, and approached challenges with a balance of curiosity and caution. The palace incident, once a moment of fear and embarrassment, had become a guiding story, one that shaped her character, her choices, and her understanding of responsibility. Reflecting on the entire experience, Karen realized that the shock she had caused was a blessing in disguise. It had forced her to confront impulsiveness, recognize the importance of self-control, and appreciate the value of discipline and professionalism in others. The lesson was clear. Curiosity is powerful, but it must be guided by awareness, respect, and thoughtfulness. As she looked back on her journey, Karen felt gratitude. She had survived a potentially dangerous situation, learned a profound lesson, and grown as a person. She understood that mistakes, while often frightening, can provide opportunities for learning, growth, and self-improvement. The palace incident had been a turning point, a defining moment that would influence her life for years to come. In the end, Karen's experience was more than just a story about a tourist and a stun gun. It was a story about human curiosity, the importance of responsibility, and the power of reflection. It was a reminder that every action has consequences, and that learning to balance thrill and caution is a vital part of personal growth. Karen had faced a shocking moment, and she had emerged wiser, more thoughtful, and deeply aware of the impact of her actions on the world around her. Karen knew that she would never forget that day at the palace. It was a lesson that would stay with her forever, guiding her decisions, shaping her character, and reminding her that curiosity, when tempered with caution, can lead to true adventure, and that impulsiveness without awareness can lead to consequences she might never want to face. Again, with this understanding, Karen smiled to herself, feeling a sense of peace. She had learned, grown, and transformed. And as she continued her journey through life, she carried the palace, the guard, and the lesson of the stun gun with her, not as a source of embarrassment, but as a source of wisdom, reflection, and personal growth.